He was a Hollywood icon, a symbol of manliness and justice on the screen. Millions adored his heroic image. She was his muse and his beloved, the woman who stood by him for 13 years. They were considered one of the most beautiful couples in the Dream Factory. But what if I tell you that behind the perfect facade of this Hollywood fairy tale, there was a true nightmare? This is not a love story. It is a chilling account of how an idol of millions turned into a cruel tyrant. How, after 13 years of living together, he simply changed the locks on their home and put her belongings out on the street. Do you think that is the worst of it? That was only the beginning. In this video, we will uncover the shocking secrets of Clint Eastwood that he tried so hard to hide. You will learn why he forced the woman he loved to have 2 abortions, and then to make an unthinkable sacrifice, an operation for sterilization that forever deprived her of the chance to have children. But that is not all. We will tell you about his eerie and peculiar obsessions that turned his hands an orange hue, and about a paranoid fear of germs that reduced their life to absurdity. How did a best friend become a paid spy who, for years, reported every word Sondra said? And how many other children did Eastwood hide while swearing eternal love to only her? And most importantly, we will follow this story to its end, to the courtroom, where one of the most influential men in the world felt certain he was untouchable. Could the woman he broke and destroyed challenge him and win justice? The answer will astonish you. Watch this video to the end, because the truth about the legendary cowboy will turn out to be far more frightening and cynical than you can imagine. 1989, Los Angeles. Civil attorney Norman Oberstein gulped down hot coffee in frantic swallows, burning his mouth and tasting nothing. In 1 hour, he would be speaking in court, and for some reason, Norman was as nervous as a schoolboy. Perhaps because his client, Sondra Locke, had made a strong impression on him. The old man did not care for Hollywood starlets, but this lively blonde with an open, sincere gaze seemed different. And the case she brought him was far from ordinary. One of the most powerful men in Hollywood, a superstar and the darling of the public, Clint Eastwood, had done something strange. He threw his girlfriend, the actress Sondra Locke, out of the house. And this, after 13 years together. He simply changed the door lock while she was away. A baffling story. For many years, the Eastwood-Locke couple had been regarded in Hollywood as one of the most harmonious. But no one guessed the terrible truth that hid behind the glossy cover of their romance, or the unthinkable sacrifices this love would demand. Suddenly homeless, utterly confused and crushed, Miss Locke spent nearly a month drifting from one friend's apartment to another, before finally turning to attorney Norman Oberstein and telling him a story that had begun many years earlier. And it began like a true fairy tale. Sondra did not yet know that this fairy tale would end in a soul-freezing finale. By the time Sondra, dressed in an elegant cowboy outfit, stepped onto the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales, she already had several roles behind her, and even an Academy Award nomination. She had not, however, become a star. The man on horseback before her, Clint Eastwood, was already a living legend, one of the most influential people in Hollywood. When Eastwood invited Sondra to play the lead in his new project, she rejoiced. She was not even upset by the indecently low fee she was offered. It seemed a triviality then. Only much later did Sondra learn that Clint Eastwood, the producer, was one of the greatest penny pinchers in Hollywood, never betraying his motto. In a short time, and for little money, Sondra suspected none of this. She stared wide-eyed at the legendary cowboy with the handsome, weathered face, his hands firm on the reins. "Hello, Elf?" The Superman tossed off casually, spurs jingling. Flustered, she stammered some sort of reply. Eastwood, meanwhile, was eyeing her outfit with curiosity. "Why do you have two hats?" he asked with a smile. Indeed, Sondra had completely forgotten she was clutching a second hat in her hands. "I just cannot decide which one to wear. This one. It sets off your big eyes." Their romance began that very evening in Clint's hotel room. The cowboy proved a master of lofty rhetoric. He showered Sondra with a torrent of high-flown, flowery declarations, and she was immensely flattered. Listening to his soft, velvety voice, she felt the ground slipping from under her feet. Eastwood kept repeating that he would not let go, not for a moment, of the most divine, the greatest, the least deserved, the most hard-won love of his life. To Sondra, he seemed a sweet romantic and a big child, and she fell in love. She had no idea that this love would become a gilded cage, and that the price for a luxurious life would prove unbearably high. Miss Locke no longer had to worry about work. Now all the best roles in Eastwood's films belonged to her. At Warner Brothers, it seemed that everything revolved around this man. Sondra was sure Clint was adored there. Later, she understood that was not so. At first, she was deeply cut by the dislike with which Rosa, sister of Phil Kaufman, the very Kaufman who had been hired to direct The Outlaw Josie Wales, spoke of Eastwood. As producer, Eastwood suddenly fired Kaufman for no apparent reason and decided to direct the film himself. When Sondra expressed her surprise, Clint only smiled. "He was looking at you in a suspiciously sweet way, darling." Sondra asked no more questions. She was even flattered. But from Rosa, she learned something else entirely. Clint had dumped Kaufman because he had broken a taboo. Among friends, Phil had dared to criticize the master. Someone immediately carried the tale. There was never any shortage of informers in Hollywood. "Remember, Sondra," Rosa told her then, "if you want to be with this man, you must admire him all the time." It was the first alarm bell, but the most dreadful rules of life with Clint Eastwood were still ahead. And admire him she did. Eastwood gave her a luxurious life without problems. "But Mr. Eastwood was married," Attorney Oberstein interrupted Sondra, "and at the time you met, as I understand it, he already had 2 children. Did that not trouble you?" Of course it did. More than once she brought up Clint's wife and children, who lived in a small town not far from Los Angeles. But the problem suddenly solved itself. One day, Eastwood came to Sondra and solemnly proclaimed, "Today is a great day. I confess to Maggie that I have found a divine love." The pomp of it made Sondra uneasy, but Clint went on. "As soon as Maggie recovers from so heavy a blow, we will slowly begin the divorce process. Not immediately, because she and the children must get used to the idea." Sondra readily agreed. She felt genuinely sorry for Eastwood's family. She herself had grown up without a father and knew exactly what that meant. Shortly before this, Clint had introduced Sondra to an old friend of his wife, Jane Brolin. Miss Brolin turned out to be a middle-aged woman with empty eyes and a horse-like face. Her ingratiating manner was instantly obvious. She was always too polite and too eager to help. With lavish detail, Jane painted for Sondra how noble and manly Clint had been during the painful talk with Maggie. "As if you were there holding a candle," Sondra thought suddenly, with a twinge of dislike. Sondra's intuition did not deceive her, but she would learn of the true, monstrous role this woman played far too late, when the betrayal had already ruined her life. In Los Angeles alone, Eastwood owned several mansions, and they drifted among them like hotel rooms. Clint said he could not stand monotony. Sondra did not exactly resent the family photos on the walls, the old toys in the children's rooms, and the dusty furniture. But these wanderings through the wreckage of another family's happiness felt false, as if her own life with Eastwood were not entirely real. With great effort, Sondra persuaded Clint that they needed a country home of their own, a place they could retreat to from time to time. Eastwood purchased a luxurious ranch in Sun Valley in the state of Idaho, where many studio bosses spent their Christmas holidays. Sondra and Clint's neighbors were Bud Yorkin, Richard Zanuck, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now they were friends who visited one another and rang in the new year together. One day, on the eve of Christmas, while Eastwood and Locke were in Sun Valley, Clint announced out of the blue that he was going to Hawaii for 2 weeks, with Maggie and the children. "You are leaving? When?" Sondra was stunned. It turned out a plane would be ready in 1 hour. "I did not want to tell you so as not to traumatize you, my love, but you understand that the children need, at least sometimes, to spend time with both parents." Clint explained, and as usual, poured out such a flood of sweet words that Sondra melted at once and agreed to everything. So she would not be lonely. Clint had thoughtfully summoned a companion for her from Los Angeles, the kind-hearted Jane Brolin. And it was this kind-hearted companion who would now strike Sondra the first blow and voice the ghastly demand that would change her fate forever. After the small private plane's trail had faded from the sky, Sondra and Jane mixed themselves cocktails and settled cozily by the fireplace. They chatted about this and that until Sondra finally dared. "Jane, I want to tell you something. Rather, ask your advice. I am pregnant, but Clint does not know yet. It will be a surprise for him." Taken aback, Brolin nearly choked on her cocktail. An awkward pause, and then she said, "I must tell you a bitter truth. You see, there is one circumstance. The circumstance was most peculiar. According to Jane, under no circumstances should Sondra bear children for Clint, because Eastwood instantly cooled toward such women. They supposedly ceased to exist for him as erotic beings. Childbirth somehow makes a woman physically defective in his eyes," Jane said sadly, and added, "And you, Sondra, know exactly how Clint is about that. And what Sondra knew of his oddities was only the tip of the iceberg. Now you will learn about his frightening rituals and obsessions that turned their life into a true hell." She did know. Any physical imperfection provoked in Eastwood a strange, uncontrollable irritation. Clint feared unattractive and sick people, and when he met someone with a pronounced defect, he would instantly avert his eyes, as if he could be infected by the very sight. In general, Eastwood was obsessed with health. Before getting into bed, he would always go to the shower with Sondra and closely watch how she washed. At the start of their romance, Sondra took it as an erotic game and did not immediately realize that her superhero, mortally afraid of contagion and microbes, simply wanted to make sure personally that she was using enough soap and shampoo. In addition, Eastwood was a maniacal fan of multivitamins. Yet no pharmaceutical company deserved his trust. They are all fools. Eastwood mixed amino acids and vitamins according to his own recipes, and together they spent hours packaging the blends into hundreds of multicolored capsules that Clint then swallowed by the handful. He knew no moderation, and from overdosing on such a supposedly useful substance as carotene, Eastwood's hands gradually began to take on a distinctly orange tint. "Think for yourself, Sondra." Jane cut into her thoughts. Maggie bore Clint 2 children. And how does he treat her now? He even nags his own daughter constantly. Look at your hips. Who will want you with hips like that, you fat cow? Sondra found such reasoning surprising, of course, but nothing more. In the end, everyone has the right to their quirks. And without saying a word to Clint about the baby, Sondra secretly had an abortion. A year passed, and Sondra became pregnant again. This time she did not want to hide it. Why? Because it hurt. Let him at least look her in the eye. After all, these pregnancies happened only because of him. Clint had forbidden her to take birth control pills. He found them, as he put it, unpleasant. He said, "Unpleasant." At dinner, she blurted out her news. Eastwood, who had been in an excellent mood up to that moment, he had just received another Golden Globe, instantly turned black as thunder. "I feel the same as before, dear," meaning strongly negative. "I do not want any more children," he ground out, as if they had discussed the subject 1,000,000 times, and without looking at her added, "In fact, why do we not settle this once and for all? I do not want you to damage your health with any more abortions. You could have a special operation and solve this problem forever." "Miss Locke, why did you not suggest that he have such an operation himself?" The attorney could not help interrupting. Good Lord, it never would have occurred to her. By then, Sondra understood that their prosperity depended entirely on her unquestioning obedience and compliance. It seemed better to lose forever the ability to have children than to lose his love. She still believed their fairy tale would never end, that they would live happily ever after and die on the same day. In the end, Sondra agreed to the operation. It was a fateful choice. She agreed to something that would break not only her body, but also her soul. And it would become her trump card in court many years later. When she returned from the clinic, Clint did not ask a single question and made it plain that nothing special had happened. Sondra also tried to behave as if she were happy and content, but moving from place to place again, living among things that had belonged to Eastwood's family, had become unbearable. The toys of Kyle and Allison that kept turning up underfoot drove Sondra to tears. And Clint, of course, saw it perfectly well. "I know your dearest wish," he told her soon after. "You need a home of your own. Choose anyone you like and it will be yours." At the beginning of 1980, she finally chose a small mansion on Stradella Road in one of the best neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Eastwood haggled with the seller for nearly a month, but in the end, the deal went through. Declining all outside offers, Sondra set about furnishing and decorating the house to her taste. She wanted a scent of the old. She thought it would bring back romance to her relationship with Clint. When the euphoria of moving faded and everything returned to the ordinary, Sondra suddenly discovered that Hollywood had forgotten her. Even Eastwood was casting her less and less. It no longer mattered to Sondra. She insisted more and more that she wanted to try directing. He only brushed her off, but Sondra did not relent. She found an unusual and intriguing script, Rat Boy, a dark little fairy tale for adults, and asked Eastwood to produce the project. She could not have imagined the hell the work would become. Eastwood meddled in everything, drearily demanding changes to the script, forcing actors on her whom she did not like at all. And that was only the beginning. Things grew worse when filming began. Eastwood would show up on set and, in front of everyone, criticize her work harshly, yell, and demand immediate overhauls. At last, in the winter of 1984, the much-suffering film was released. Los Angeles greeted it coolly, But in New York, the debuting director found many admirers. Locke was even invited to one of the prestigious festivals in France. She shared the happy news with Eastwood at Dante's club. They were turning slowly on the dance floor. Sondra loved the way Eastwood's hands would gently encircle her waist. Suddenly, she flinched in pain. Eastwood had stepped hard on her foot. "Perhaps you will allow me to lead this dance?" he said with a cold fury. "Tell me, Miss Locke," Attorney Oberstein broke in again. "If I remember correctly, in 1984, Clint Eastwood did finally divorce his wife, Maggie Eastwood. Did he propose to you?" No, he was in no hurry to propose. And Sondra's pride, of course, would not let her raise the subject herself. Besides, she feared seeming old-fashioned. Who, after all, worried about such trifles anymore? And yet, deep down, she was hurt. One day, while Clint was away on yet another shoot, Sondra wandered through the empty house with her beloved parrot and suddenly felt sharply abandoned and alone. Over the years, Clint had managed to drive away all her friends, and there was no one left to confide in. Sondra dialed Jane Brolin. They chatted. Sondra did not want to share her sorrows, but Jane's voice sounded so sincere and sympathetic that the complaints poured out by themselves. Clint was always busy now, rarely at home, and her modest professional successes only irritated him. Thinking of her film, Sondra could not help adding that in staging several scenes, Clint had not been entirely right. Had he not interfered then, Ratboy might have turned out much better. Jane agreed eagerly and even sympathized. Every word spoken in that friendly conversation was passed to Eastwood at once. Sondra herself, with her own hands, gave him the weapon he would soon use against her. Clint returned shortly thereafter, sullen and irritable. He said he was having trouble on set. He threw fits over anything. That the television had been left on, that dishes were in the sink, that a chair was out of place. Sondra did not take it too hard. She had learned to accept the small domestic weaknesses of a great man. Other things worried her far more. Once, arriving at the studio, Sondra suddenly learned that the actor she had personally called the day before to set a test for her new film had been fired that very morning. The next time she discovered, just as suddenly, that a script she had negotiated to buy the day before had been sold to another director 2 hours earlier. It was pure mystery. Sondra started to complain to Clint, but he only shrugged. What am I supposed to do about it? He pretended to be uninvolved. In fact, Eastwood was behind all her professional failures, methodically and cold-bloodedly destroying everything she cared about. Meanwhile, Christmas of 1989 was approaching. As always, Sondra cheerfully anticipated their trip to Sun Valley. Skiing, sunshine, and crisp frost had always been wonderful therapy, both for Eastwood and for their relationship. True, Sondra was a little put out to learn that this time, Eastwood had invited the family friend, Jane Brolin, for the holidays. Upon arriving at the ranch, on the first evening, Sondra, Clint, and Jane were to visit their neighbors. Sondra lingered before the mirror. She wanted to be irresistible tonight. At last, pleased with the result, she floated out of the bedroom in a sumptuous outfit. "I am ready." "Hey, where is everyone? We are going to be late." But Clint and Jane were nowhere to be found. Perplexed, Sondra went through the house and then called the Zanu CKs, the hosts. "What do you mean, where are Clint and Jane?" Lily Zanuck was surprised. "Here with us, of course. Sitting here drinking tea. And where are you?" When they returned several hours later, Sondra burst into tears and rushed at Clint. "How could you do this to me? Humiliate me like that?" Suddenly, Jane cut in. "Do you really not understand that he is tired of you? That you are in his way? That he is fed up with your silly fault-finding?" Sondra was stunned. She looked at Eastwood, but he left the room without a word. Eastwood's silence was more terrible than any words. The plan to destroy her had been set in motion, and the most humiliating events were still ahead. From that day, everything moved quickly. They returned to Los Angeles. Clint vanished somewhere. Soon, a formal notice arrived from Eastwood's office. "Dear Miss Locke, would you be so kind as to vacate within 1 week the apartment of Mr. Eastwood, in which he graciously allowed you to reside without paying rent?" Sondra did not know what to think. She had lived with this man for 13 years. He had given her this house, into which Sondra had poured her heart and all her savings. And now, this cynical, "would you be so kind?" But even that letter was not the lowest point. What he did 1 week later would grind her name and dignity into the dirt. 1 week after receiving the letter, Sondra was urgently called to the phone right on a set. A neighbor told her that men were changing the locks on her house, and her things in boxes were being set outside on the lawn. "So, Miss Locke, you filed suit against Mr. Eastwood seeking the return of your house, your car, your personal belongings, and your parrot? Is that correct?" The hearing in Eastwood's case took place on the 31st of May, 1989. Clint's attorneys insisted on a closed court. None of Sondra's acquaintances, whom she had asked to testify on her behalf, showed up for the session. Since the ill-fated house was registered in Eastwood's name and Sondra was not legally his wife, the primary task for her attorneys was to prove that Clint and Sondra had lived there together as spouses and maintained a common household. In court, the defendant was asked to describe his relationship with Miss Locke. "We dated," the actor answered without hesitation. "Sometimes we spent nights together." When Oberstein asked whether they had lived under the same roof, Eastwood nodded reluctantly. "Sometimes, but very rarely." There were many witnesses who confirmed Eastwood's testimony. Among the very first was Jane Brolin. Sondra lost that case. She got neither the house, nor the Mercedes, nor the books, let alone the parrot. He won. He took everything. It seemed to be the end, but precisely at that moment, when she was completely crushed, the story took an unexpected turn. So as not to lose heart entirely and to finish the film she had begun, Sondra had to see a psychiatrist. The doctor prescribed her handfuls of multicolored pills. 6 months later, during a routine medical exam, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. After the agonizing operation and 2 grueling courses of chemotherapy were behind her, and Sondra was slowly returning to normal life, attorney Norman Oberstein paid her an unexpected visit. Eastwood thought he had gotten rid of her forever. He had not counted on one thing. Sondra had found an ally ready to expose all his dirty secrets, including those Sondra herself did not know. "Sondra," he said, "I insist we take this case up again. That rascal must be punished. I am filing an appeal." In the meantime, Norman had obtained medical opinions proving that Sondra's illness was directly connected to her 2 abortions, and above all, to the sterilization operation Eastwood had forced upon her. Under the laws of the United States, he would have to pay dearly for the irreparable harm to Sondra's health. In addition, Oberstein had found witnesses who confirmed that Jane Brolin had regularly received money from Eastwood for passing along your friendly conversations. It also turned out that Brolin had done her utmost. telling Eastwood outright inventions, that Sondra was urging actors not to work in his films, that she was trumpeting everywhere that Eastwood was a worthless human being, and that the manly endowments of the super cowboy were frankly laughable. "It will, of course, be unpleasant for you to hear this, Miss Locke," the attorney added, "but I have learned that right in the midst of your relationship, Mr. Eastwood had 2 more children. He fathered them with a certain Jocelyn Reeves. This detail adds nothing legally to our case, but it will dent his reputation. And believe me, this time the proceedings will be public." The masks were off. Now it was not merely a battle over a house, but a war for justice that all of America would watch. What did Sondra feel? She was perfectly calm. She wanted to forget Eastwood as quickly as possible, forget all her troubles, and simply return to work. But about a month after her talk with the attorney, Clint resurfaced. He came with a business proposal. She would refrain from filing the appeal, and in return, he would give her a contract with Warner Brothers for $1.5 million. The contract guaranteed she could make films on that money, and Sondra did not hesitate for a second about what to do. She believed him one last time. That faith in his decency turned into the most devious and cynical deception in his arsenal. And 6 years later, in 1996, there was a second and final court case brought by Sondra Locke against Clint Eastwood. She accused him of having made a fraudulent offer from the very start. Not a single one of her projects had been approved by the studio. The producers at Warner Brothers, following a personal arrangement with Eastwood, strung her along for years and fed her promises of tomorrow. This time, Sondra Locke won. She received substantial monetary compensation from both Warner Brothers and Clint Eastwood personally. Sondra Locke no longer believed in fairy tales, and the fact that her current companion in life is taciturn and not a fan of flowery, high-flown declarations only pleases her. Love does not have to be expressed in words. By the way, Sondra's partner is the very oncologist who once operated on her. They have been together for several years now, and they seem happy.